second module, and I'm going to address why companies need strong dynamic capabilities more than ever. And the answer's got a lot to do with the innovation economy that we're all in, and also deep uncertainty. And the military has a term they call VUCA to be a bit more explicit about this. So let me explore VUCA for you. What does VUCA stand for? It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the world we're in today. That's the world we're in even before the pandemic, even before Donald Trump and some of his unpredictable actions. So the global economy has always had a certain amount of volatility, but uncertainty is about things we can't calibrate. It's about unknown unknowns. And complexity comes with globalization. Things are connected to everything else, such that a ship blocking the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal can suddenly throw global supply chains out of whack. And then considerable ambiguity. We don't know what's going on a lot of the time. What really are the origins of COVID? What is Xi Jinping's real goals? These things all impact not only nation states, not only individuals, but management and business enterprises. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And, if I may say so, if the VUCA world were to vanish, you could actually continue to use Michael Porter's 5 forces approach and other frameworks. And to me, those approaches are designed for a world of predictability, because the 1950s, 1960s were periods of predictability. And that's the background in which the field of industrial organization that informed Michael Porter's 5 forces approach, that's the background in which those theory builders lived. So that's not the world we live in today. So I think we need dynamic capabilities even if we didn't have so much globalization, even if we didn't have so much uncertainty. But given that the world is where it is, we definitely need a new framework. And dynamic capabilities, I believe, is the most relevant framework. Although if something better comes along, that would be terrific. I've been waiting patiently, and I will continue to wait and refine dynamic capabilities until something better is here for us all to use. So let me make a distinction between risk and uncertainty. Frank Knight, famous economist from Chicago, made this distinction over 100 years ago, but people keep forgetting it, and they keep conflating risk and uncertainty. So banks have risk management departments. They don't have uncertainty management departments, but they should. What's the difference? Well, with a risk, you can calibrate, at least probabilistically, the likelihood of events. That's the very nature of risk. And in fact, because you can calibrate the likely frequency of events, there's often insurance that you can use to protect yourself. There may be natural hedges you can use even if there's no insurance products. But with uncertainty, you don't know what the future state of the world's going to be. And you'll see there in my diagram, I've got, future state 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And then there's a lot of question marks, because really the world and the future is about unknown unknowns. There are many undefined futures and only a few defined futures. You can think of these as scenarios, if you wish, and they are of enormous complexity. In the financial markets, they sometimes refer to these as black swans, things that you didn't expect to occur that suddenly occur, that suddenly crop up. So the world we face is one of deep uncertainty. A framework that's fit for purpose has to be able to deal with uncertainty. If all it can deal with is risk, throw it away. It's not useful. So as I pointed out, risk can often be managed through insurance and hedges. Uncertainty cannot. And uncertainty requires that you build organizations that are not just agile, but it actually can do a good job of anticipating future unknowns and can certainly adapt quickly, but also shape outcomes, shape the environment as much as it's being shaped by the environment. Now, what I'm telling you is not new. Here's a great book by Dr. William Janeway, who is a venture capitalist, a very thoughtful one, who points out the obvious, that the innovation economy is saturated with unquantifiable uncertainty. So this notion of unquantifiability, of course, is very upsetting for most of us, because we like to put numbers on things and come up with clear and precise answers. But in the world of deep uncertainty, which is where the innovation economy is today, that's just not possible. So we're living in a world of deep uncertainty, or as Dr. Janeway calls it, unquantifiable uncertainty. And I'd recommend his book because it's a very practical book about how to live in this world. Deep uncertainty requires, as I said before, a different type of management. And I'm going to call it entrepreneurial management. Now, historically, we've thought of small companies as being entrepreneurial and being led and built by entrepreneurs, and big companies as being bureaucratic. But in today's world, big companies can no longer be too bureaucratic. They must be entrepreneurial too. And if they're not going to succeed. So it says, if you're going to build a large organization, you better make sure it remains entrepreneurial, which is a tall order. Or in the alternative, and maybe you keep dividing a company up and spinning off divisions so that it's small enough to keep its entrepreneurial spirit. So what is the nature of the environment that we have? When there's deep uncertainty, there's a lack of predictability, and if you want a metaphor, I find the best metaphor is mixed martial arts, or MMA as I refer to it on the slides. And those of you that follow mixed martial arts, and I don't, but I've got some general idea of what it's all about. What I understand is that the rules are, first of all, there's very few rules, and that they change. And that's the nature of competition. There are rules. There's a rule of law. There are antitrust laws and things of that kind. But in the world of deep uncertainty, new rules, I don't mean laws, but new ways of doing things, new business models, new ways that people interact are taking place all the time. New players are constantly emerging. And to succeed in this world, managers need to be entrepreneurial, and entrepreneurs need to also find managers who think the same way that they do. So it's not like everybody in the organization has to be entrepreneurial, but the top management team has to have an entrepreneurial spirit, has to see urgency in decision making, and has to demonstrate considerable agility. Always remember when the founders of Google reached out to Eric Schmidt, they knew that they needed someone to run the place, and as Eric Schmidt said, he was the adult in the room. And you can put that as, he was the one that knew how to run a company, but the leadership was still with Page and Brin. And I think that's one way in which they've done a nice balance to keep their entrepreneurial spirit alive, while at the same time having a manager keep the operational side of the company in check. So we need different types of companies if we're going to have strong dynamic capabilities. And we need different types of companies, and we need different rules and decision criteria. Decision criteria quite different from what we teach in business schools. Here is a chart that I borrowed from my good friend Paul Shoemaker at Wharton. And on this chart, on the left, we have risk, and on the right, we have uncertainty. And clearly, there's gradations between the two. And as you notice, the set of tools associated with risk are things you're familiar with, like cost-benefit analysis, net present value analysis, forecasting, utility theory. Many of the tools, particularly the tools of modern finance, are all about making decisions under certainty. The world of uncertainty and ambiguity, there are very few tools that you can use. It's more art than it is science, and it's more about the unquantifiable aspects of decision making. That's not to say that there aren't procedures, that there aren't decision tools that can be helpful. And on the right there, we talk about systems thinking, we talk about legitimation theory, we talk about scenario planning, things of that kind that can actually help you manage in a world of deep uncertainty. But a lot of the tools that we're trained to use are just not appropriate. How can you figure out what the NPV of an investment in autonomous vehicles might be for a company like Google or a company like General Motors for that matter? You can't. You have to use real options thinking. If you get into the business, that will give you a chance to expand, because you may not be able to get in later if you sit on the sidelines. It's that type of thinking you need. There is no concise way of quantifying what the risk and return is from making those kinds of investments. So that's the world we're in, and that's the world that dynamic capabilities deals with. Now, managers of big tech companies understand this very, very well. So what I'm telling you is common knowledge in Silicon Valley. And here's a quote from Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He says, "There are decisions that can be made by analysis. Unfortunately, there's a whole other set of decisions that you can't ultimately boil down to a math problem." And what does that mean? It means that a lot of the tools of optimization that we're so familiar with and we teach our students to use, and sometimes our managers require us to do exercises using these tools, it's really a fool's errand. It's a fool's errand with this deep uncertainty. So the quote from Bezos is, I think, an insightful one, and it's no doubt what he had in mind when he tried to figure out what the next big thing was, whether it was the Kindle or Amazon Web Services. There's no NPV that he could reasonably have put on those investments. I'm not saying they didn't try, but you wouldn't pay a lot of attention to it. You have to rely much more on intuition, and you have to make decisions that are incremental and that you can adjust as you learn more. So that's the whole notion, of course, of lean startup, and I'll have more to say about that later. The point is that things are not mathematically precise when you're in the world of deep uncertainty. The rules are very fragile, and things change with alacrity. What are the observations I draw from this? Well, basically, I draw the observation that when the business environment is saturated with deep uncertainty, you need a framework like dynamic capabilities. And that the static frameworks, I use the term static to refer to frameworks that don't have innovation and uncertainty built into them. And quite frankly, that's what most of the textbooks present to us today, is static frameworks where uncertainty is read out of the story, where innovation is read out of the story, and not surprisingly, most of what's important is read out of the story. And that's no longer acceptable. So, managing under deep uncertainty, as I said, requires new mental models, and I present to you dynamic capabilities as that new mental model. It means that it's not going to be as neat and tidy as some of the existing theories, and so those that favor hardness over importance are not going to like dynamic capabilities. If you really want a tight analytical model and something that has great precision, you'll find dynamic capabilities a little awkward. But at the same time, I suggest to you it's a systems approach. It's a workable systems theory that's useful for managers of business enterprises and of the nation state. So You might want to think of it as a systems theory, and nobody's yet figured out how to boil systems theory down to simple equations. So investment in the development of dynamic capabilities is something that can have a positive impact on innovation. In fact, the concept, and this is to quote Professor Mariana Moscatato at University College London, the concept and practice of dynamic capabilities is perhaps the key missing element in the search for the new generation of innovation policies. So she goes so far as to suggest it's not only critical for management, but it's also critical for understanding innovation policies, and I would go one step further and say for management of the public sector too. We've just been through a pandemic, and you'll notice how clumsy nation states were in dealing with the pandemic, and if they had stronger dynamic capabilities, they would have reacted faster and executed better. So dynamic capabilities is something we've all got to come to understand. It's a new mental model that sees solutions coming from agility, from redeployment, and not just from amassing quantities. Think about warfare in the past. It was how many soldiers can I put in the field? How many tanks can I put in the field? Today it's no longer about that. It's about how can I communicate? How can I be quick? How can I move things around? So the U.S. military and the military of most other countries has been forced into the world of dynamic capabilities perhaps long before business did. So there's a lot we can learn from military leaders about how to manage in the world of uncertainty. You've heard the term the fog of war. That's about deep uncertainty. When nation states go to war, there's no clear outcomes, and there's a lot of ambiguity, and the generals in the field and the admirals on the ocean have to live with that and make good decisions. And that's approximate to the way that industry is today. It's more, as I said, like mixed martial arts than it is like chess. You know, chess, there are certain rules that don't change. They haven't changed for hundreds of years. There's only a certain number of pieces on the board. That is more like the industrial economy. The innovation economy is more like mixed martial arts. And these are good metaphors for you to bear in mind. And you might also want to think of dynamic capabilities as a bit like jazz. There's a lot of improvisation, and there's a lot of adaptation. And it's also a bit like an orchestra. One has to utilize the different assets you have in certain sequences in some cases, but it's a mixture of the orchestra and jazz. So jazz, mixed martial arts, and to some extent the symphony orchestra are good metaphors for what we're dealing with here. Now, Nobel laureates have dealt with these issues, or at least thought about them, and Ken Arrow, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, a Nobel laureate in economics, said quite insightfully that uncertainty would pose no problem for the business firm if commitments were costless. In other words, if there weren't such things as fixed assets and you could change everything overnight with alacrity, we wouldn't worry about uncertainty. But sadly, that's not the world we're in. We can't change everything overnight. And many large organizations may be more like aircraft carriers. They take a long time to turn around. So you can see the challenges here. Uncertainty is a problem, and we have to deal with it. So our task here is to build a framework that recognizes that to create the new, we need entrepreneurs. To administer the ordinary, we need managers. And to change the old, we need leaders. So the management team of the future has to have this mixture of entrepreneurs, managers, and leaders. All three of these executive traits are important and are central to dynamic capabilities. And as I've said, being entrepreneurial is critical when there's deep uncertainty. And I'll leave you with this slide, which just summarizes really what these key differences are. It's dynamic capabilities which matters, because Dynamic capabilities brings you evolutionary fitness. Optimization does not. Optimization just gives you fitness for the moment. It's about technical efficiency. The key elements of dynamic capabilities, and you will hear more about this in the subsequent modules, are sensing, seizing, and shaping or transforming. And these things are difficult, which is both a challenge and an opportunity, because that which is difficult is hard to imitate. So you can see right away that dynamic capabilities can create the foundations of competitive advantage. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.